Here on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, just south of Haifa. We've actually had the privilege of being here now for 2 weeks, teaching all throughout Israel, starting in Jerusalem. And with me is my wife, Jenny, and we have had a wonderful, blessed time here. We spent yesterday up in the Galilee region, teaching up in that area in Capernaum and Magdala, and going down to Tiberias. And that's where I want to pick up today, is in John 21. Jesus had already suffered, died, and risen from the dead. John 21 is speaking about Jesus revealing himself the third time after his resurrection to his disciples. You'll find that in John 21:14, where it says, "This now is the three times that Jesus was revealed to his disciples, he being raised from the dead." And it's interesting that the Lord had chosen a place just north of Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee, of course, really not too far from where, when he was alive, he multiplied the loaves and fishes. But he chose this particular place, he chose Tiberias, just north of there, at that shore, to reveal himself to his disciples. And it's interesting because in Scripture it talks about sand, the sand on the shore. David said on one occasion, "How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. If I were to number them, they would outnumber the sand on the seashore." That's a lot of thoughts when you think about it. That's why it's so important for us to come into a relationship with the Lord, so that he has many thoughts that he wants to reveal to us. I can't even imagine living this life without knowing one thought of God. That would be an empty life. But in relationship with the Lord, we can know his thoughts. And the shore was a place, of course, where there was sand. And in Revelation 13:1, John, again, is writing that. And he's writing it really from being caught up into heaven. Chapter 4 talks about a door being opened in heaven. And he was caught up there, and he saw and heard things that he recorded in Revelation. And he spoke about standing on the sand of the sea and seeing a beast, this being coming up out of the sea. And sea in Scripture oftentimes was symbolic or meaning of something that was unknown. You don't know what's under there. And something was coming up, but he was standing on the sand of the sea. And the word sand in Revelation 13 is Amos, Amos, and it comes from the word Hama, which means close together or close association or together. So, of course, when you see the sand, it's all compacted. And there's something in that, because I believe sand can be intimacy. And that's why John, if you look at all the apostles, he was the one that was most intimate with the Lord. He received the revelation of Jesus Christ. He received this, and he wrote this down when, as we're going to see in John chapter 21, when they're out in the sea, he sees it's the Lord. He's there, it's the Lord, because John is in the close association and the closest to him. And that speaks something to me, because ministry is important, but what's more important and essential in our life is intimacy with the Lord. We should be cultivating an intimacy with the Lord, something that the Lord has been putting on our hearts for years now, about growing closer to him, coming closer and closer, like sand, compacted together, closely knit together. You're intimate, and it's in those places that the Lord reveals himself. So in John 21, it says, "After these things, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias," just north of Tiberias, but the Sea of Galilee, of course. "And he revealed himself this way: Simon, Peter, and Thomas, being called the twin, and Nathanael from Cana of Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, James and John." So we have 5 names here, and 2 others. We don't know who they were. His disciples were together, so there were 7 of them. Peter's with Thomas now. He's kind of in this position. It's between Jesus dying, revealing himself to Peter and John at the tomb after he rose 3 days and 3 nights. But Peter's kind of still vacillating. I go fishing. And they decide to follow him. He's with Thomas now, the doubter. And they're together, and James and John are with them, and Nathaniel's with them, and 2 others. So there's 7 of them. The other 4 5 actually were back, doing what they were doing. But it says that Simon Peter said to them, I'm going out to fish. They said to him, we also are coming with you. They went and entered into the boat at once, and in that night they caught nothing at all. They fished all night, caught nothing. And it now becoming early morning, Jesus stood on the shore. He's on the shore now. Remember, the shore and the sand speaks of something that's close association together, and he's standing there, and he cries out to them. It says, Jesus said to them, children, which is very interesting because they were grown men. But they were acting like children because they go a-fishing. And instead of waiting and learning how to wait on the Lord, Peter, being still impulsive, says, I'm going out, and he catches nothing. And Jesus calls them children. He said, do you not have anything to eat? They said, no. And he said to them, cast the net into the right side of the boat, and you will find. Now, right always is indicative of strength, but it's also wisdom. You find that in Ecclesiastes chapter 10 about the right side. That's why when Jesus went back to the Father, he's sitting at the right hand of the Father. That speaks of wisdom. That's the wisdom of God. And in Greek culture, the left side was the lucky side. We don't know this. Maybe he was casting the net all night on the left side thinking he was going to get lucky, but he came up nothing. But Jesus says throw it on the right side of the boat because Jesus is the wisdom of God. And when you listen and learn from the wisdom of God, you'll catch something that instead of fishing all night and leaning on your intelligence, you come up empty. So they did what he said. They cast it onto the right side of the boat. And it says when they cast, they no longer had the strength to draw from the multitude of fish. Jesus just filled the nets. And it says a disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. Again, there's that revelation. He's the most intimate. He's developed that intimacy. He's leaning on Jesus' breast at the Passover, the last Passover they celebrated. Who is it? He asked. Jesus said, it's the one who's going to dip his hand into the dish with me. He's the most intimate. He's having it revealed to him. And he says to Peter, it's the Lord. Peter puts his coat on, his fishing coat. He had thrown it off. Now he puts it on. He throws himself in the sea. And the other disciples came in a little boat, for they were not far from the land, only about 200 cubits, dragging the net of fish. Jesus said again, filled their nets. And then they went up on the land. They saw a coal fire lying and a fish lying on it and bread. And Jesus said to them, bring from the little fish which you caught now. But look what Peter does. It says, Simon Peter went up and dragged the net onto the land full of big fish. Jesus said, bring little fish. Peter brings big fish. And he's dragging this net. Sometimes, we do more work and sweat equity than we have to. If Jesus said, bring the little fish, why drag this big net full of 153 big fish? But Peter's got this big mentality. I got to do big things for you, Lord. Well, you don't really need to do big things for the Lord. The Lord's in the little things just as much as he is in the big things. So it says, Jesus said to them, come, break fast. No one of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you, knowing that it's the Lord. Then Jesus came and took the bread and gave to them in the same way the little fish. And again, it says this was the third time he was revealed to them. And I want to close here because after he gets done eating breakfast with them, he takes Peter aside. And when they broke fast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? Now, a lot of people think that these that Jesus was saying were the other disciples. I don't believe that. I think Jesus was talking about the fish. I think he was saying, Peter, do you love me more than these 153 big fish? Because he just still could not cut the cord as such or throw away the net of his livelihood. He was still going there. He was still doing it. And Jesus said, do you love me more than, I believe, these fish? And Peter said, I love you, Lord. And he said, then if you do, then feed my lambs. If we love God, we'll do what he says. Jesus isn't interested in us doing things for his approval. He wants us to do the things that he says for us to do. It's our first love. He says again, Simon, do you love me? He says, yes, Lord, I love you. Shepherd my sheep. Thirdly, he said to him, Simon, do you love me? Peter was grieved that he said to him the third time, do you love me? He said to him, Lord, you perceive all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. 3 times Peter denied him at a fire. 3 times. 3 is a number for intensity. And it was getting intense with Peter. He was even grieved that Jesus asked him 3 times. Well, when Peter denied him 3 times, it says Jesus was grieved. So now Peter's feeling what Jesus felt when he denied him. But now Jesus is restoring him because he's a shepherd, a God who restores us, who brings us back to health and welfare, shalom, peace. And he's restoring Peter. And not only that, he's commissioning him to be the apostle to the Jews, as later Paul would be to the Gentiles. But what are the these that you may love more than Jesus? For Peter, it may have been the fish. We don't know. Could have been. I believe it was. But what is the these? Do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than this? Do you love me more than your job, your career, making a name for yourself, a sport? Some people love a football more than they love Jesus. Peter loved fish. Sometimes it's hard to let go of the things that we're used to and we love, but when we do, and we let the Lord lead us, and we come into this intimacy, we find the abundant life that Jesus came to give us. And Peter never went back fishing again after this. He ended his fishing times on this earth. He now gave himself to feeding Jesus' people, his lambs and his sheep. And that's a lesson for us to learn as we're standing at this beautiful sunset now, looking over this sea. I just want to leave you with a thought. Develop an association, a close intimacy with the Lord. Make it your goal in this life to grow in intimacy with the Lord. His thoughts will be revealed to you. You will find more in this life than you could ever imagine, and certainly more than what you could seek on your own. So until next time, we just bid you shalom from this beautiful place here in the land of Israel.